Rodney Orr from TiderInsider.com, Tider Insider TV. Rodney, we're just 2 days away from the second national signing period that begins, and we'll look at the huge junior day that Alabama had over the weekend. But let's start with what's left on the table for the Crimson Tide potentially on Wednesday. And let's begin, of course, with Mckinley Jackson, the outstanding defensive tackle out of Lucedale, Mississippi, a prime target for numerous schools, including Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to me, Gary, this is still undecided. I know that there's some people out there this morning following the visit to Texas A&M that, he's leaning that way now, and he could be. Obviously, I think Texas A&M as well as Alabama, LSU, Auburn, other teams had made him a top priority, especially down the stretch. But it's kind of appeared to be an Alabama-Texas A&M battle. Nick Saban got the in-home visit last on Thursday during the day. And then, Texas A&M gets the last official visit. So now we're in the dead period. Doesn't mean that the coaches and the prospects don't communicate, because they still do. There's still an open line of communication. And we'll see what happens. Again, could Texas A&M possibly be in position right now? Yes, but still there's a couple of days left, and I don't think all the bullets have been fired.
Indeed, that'll be an interesting one. And as far as a player is concerned, again, it's a recruiting class. It's not a recruiting, one singular player, but this is the kind of guy potentially that swings the pendulum for you, because if you get him, especially if you're Alabama and you got Tim Smith to go along with Mckinley Jackson, you're looking at two potentially dominant interior defensive linemen, plus they're on your team. If you lose him to a Texas A&M, not only do you not have a player like that, but then you're playing against the guy for 3 years or 4. So that I think puts it in perspective in terms of how big one player can be to a recruiting class for you and ultimately against you if you don't sign him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question about that. And listen, I know that there's a lot of Alabama fans out there. I see it on TiderInsider.com, and it's not complaining, but it's a form of, some sort of a concern that Alabama hasn't really closed on some of these guys that have had their recruiting open, have left it open. It hasn't closed strongly on some of these guys in the last couple of 2 or 3 years, like a Mckinley Jackson. And it's just gotten so competitive, Gary. You know that. I've said this many times. Texas A&M's not paying Jimbo Fisher $75 million to continuously lose players to Alabama.
That's right.
There's a lot of pressure. Kirby Smart, Jeremy Pruitt's now obviously involved too. A lot of these coaches. So it's become a lot more competitive than it used to be. So I think you have to kind of be realistic. You're not going to win all these battles all the time. That's not predicting that Alabama won't win this with Mckinley Jackson, because I still think, as I said, there's still some bullets to be fired, and we'll see how it all unfolds. Yeah, we will.
And yeah, we will. That's all I can say. I've got, these feelings mean nothing, but I just think that I think Alabama is in a good shape with him. That's just the gut feeling I get. What about Enos Rakestraw, the defensive back out of Texas? That I'll be honest with you, Rodney, just a few months ago I couldn't have told you, who Enos Rakestraw was. But down the stretch here for this second period where there aren't many players available, this is a guy who's picked up a lot of momentum, outstanding athlete, needs to get a little bit better physically. But guys that can cover in college football are at a premium, and certainly he can do that. What's the latest on Enos Rakestraw going into Wednesday?
Well, we'll see there. Again, I agree with everything you said. He's kind of come on like gangbusters here towards the end of the recruiting process. And that happens sometimes. The value of some of these guys, because the pool is so much more shallow, if you want to put it that way, there's not as many prospects to choose from. But his stock has certainly soared, and Alabama's been in the mix. Again, it's a numbers deal with Alabama, too. I mean, you just can't take them all.
Right.
So we'll see how that part of it unfolds. I do think Alabama could certainly make a strong push here at the very end for Rakestraw. I know that he has a great relationship with the defense coordinator, Ryan Walters at Missouri. So I'd keep an eye on them. And Texas made a strong push this weekend. They certainly want him. They're talking to my Texas sources. So we'll see what happens. He's the Dallas-Fort Worth Area Player of the Year defensively by the Dallas Morning News. So he's a good-looking prospect as a cornerback.
Alabama's been heavily involved in the state of Texas since Nick Saban arrived in Tuscaloosa. And the defensive lineman Alfred Collins from Bastrop Cedar Creek High School, looking more and more like, you've been saying this all along, but I guess it'd be a shock if he signed anywhere other than Texas at this point, right?
Well, it would surprise me because I have some contacts in Texas that are very close to some of these situations out there. And they've been telling me for 2 or 3 weeks at least now that Alfred Collins most likely to Texas. And I know there's people putting it out there about Alabama. And I know Nick Saban went out there, and Freddie Roach has been out there too. And but what they tell me is it's probably almost 100% sure that he will end up in Texas. Oklahoma's probably been the second team, and Alabama has been in the mix and certainly got a lot of consideration, and he made an official visit here, but it doesn't look like Alabama has very much of a shot with him. And he's a 5-star defensive lineman, and again, his mother was an athlete, a track athlete at Texas. He has family that work at the University of Texas now, so those connections certainly work in their favor.
Of course, last week, some positive recruiting news headed into this late period, as expected. I guess it's safe to say that because it just made sense on both sides for Carl Tucker and for Alabama that the University of North Carolina grad transfer will wind up in Tuscaloosa. That's going to be the case. Since he's announced he's coming here, you're talking about a guy who's played in a major program in a major conference, Power 5 conference for several years, a big, strong kid who's also athletic enough to catch the football. What's Alabama getting in Carl Tucker at tight end?
Well, first of all, what you said there, the experience, and he is a guy that has performed on this level very well. 6'2", 250, guy that can block, bring some physical presence in the blocking game, but also he's a legitimate threat as a receiver, and I think that's something they really wanted to find. And hey, listen, I know Alabama fans are like, well, why didn't you get a legitimate tight end in the high school ranks this year? To be honest with you, I don't think it was a great year for tight ends, probably not a great year for wide receivers, and maybe not even a great year for offensive linemen for that matter. But so to get a guy in the grad transfer portal or the transfer portal like Carl Tucker is certainly a great option to have. He can come in, I think, certainly make a very strong contribution early to Alabama because, last year what they had to do was use Chris Owens and Kendall Randolph, 2 offensive linemen, in that blocking role, and it basically tips off the defense that a running play is coming. So now you've got a guy that you can put in there as a blocker, legitimate blocker, but also the defense has to be alert for him as a receiver as well.
All right, Rodney, just not that many guys out there that are left, and I think we've run down most of them. Other guys that we're unsure of are current Alabama commitments, but guys that have not signed. Give us the latest on those guys and whether or not you think they wind up at Alabama or somewhere else.
Well, Jason Jones has been one that's been mentioned a lot from Calera, the defensive lineman, and I honestly expect him to end up elsewhere, whether it's Baylor or Oregon, either one. I would be surprised if he doesn't end up elsewhere. And again, could I be wrong? Certainly. As far as Jamil Burrows, defensive lineman out of Georgia, a 4-star defensive lineman, and also Javon Baker, a 4-star wide receiver out of Georgia. Both say, Gary, they still plan to sign with Alabama on Wednesday. Both have certainly, it's well documented that they've got to do some things academically to get in order. If they do those things, I think they would both be valuable additions to this recruiting class. I think Jamil Burrows, when he was a sophomore in high school, he had 5-star written all over him, and then did not probably have a great junior year, and his stock slipped. And but he came back, had a really strong senior year. So if both those guys sign with Alabama and they get themselves in order academically, I think they're outstanding prospects.
We'll watch Wednesday with anticipation, not anything like it used to be, that's for sure. I will remind people, though, that we will, in addition to our regular episode of Tider Insider TV tomorrow night at 6:30 on WVUA 23, Rodney will be with us on Wednesday night at 6:30 in studio for the Tider Insider TV signing day recap show. So we will let you know exactly how it shakes out. Rodney, I want to get to the juniors because 2021 is in full gear and big weekend. I want to ask you about a guy who I've if I've watched a guy up close and I'm impressed, I'm gonna lead the band for him. But Kool-Aid Mckinstry, out of Pinson Valley, a guy I did his games a couple of times when he was a sophomore and junior in the Super 7 championships. Next level athlete, Rod. I mean, this guy is just oozes out of his pores, is what I think I said on Twitter. Because of that, he's also a phenomenal basketball player. The key with this guy is if you're going to get him to play football, you're probably going to have to open the door for him to play basketball too. That's just reality. And he was in this weekend, maybe more so on a basketball visit. But Nate Oates offers a scholarship. A lot of people seem to feel like he'll wind up out of state. I don't think so. I think now with Oates on board, with Saban tag teaming this guy, there's a good chance to get Quincy Mckinstry, known as Kool-Aid, and I think he's a difference maker, probably in both sports, but as a football player, he's next level. Rod, what do you think about him, and what do you think about Alabama's attempt to recruit him for both sports?
Well, again, I've heard a lot of things about out-of-state, schools. Clemson's been one. I think LSU's been one. I think this one's going to be a real battle. And, hopefully this is the kind of battle that I think Alabama's going to have to win. These battles, like I said, even now the in-state ones are becoming more and more competitive. And, if Alabama's to stay on top, they're going to have to close these deals and on a guy like Quincy Mckinstry. And great player, no question about that. And, again, I just think it's going to be a battle, and it's a long way off. We're talking about a year away, and these things are always very difficult to predict this far away. But certainly he's a great player, and there's a few others in the state that Dylan Brooks was in. He's from over at Roanoke, and he's going to be a great player, outside linebacker type guy, defensive end. And I know that Tennessee's in there very strongly. Jeremy Pruitt, they've done a great job on him. Auburn's got some connections to him. LSU, Orgeron called him on the day they played in the national championship game, spoke to him in an hour. So he's being heavily recruited. Alabama's certainly in the mix there as well. And, those are two 5-star type players. And, again, these battles are getting tougher and tougher.
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. It's just amped up. One guy that I did mean to ask you about for Wednesday and I didn't, so it's not too late for me to fix that. Just kind of, skip my mind. But Van Pran, the big center out in New Orleans, who's committed to Georgia, but clearly looking to go elsewhere. Rodney, I think he might have been at Florida over the weekend. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what's the latest on him?
Well, it's interesting. You hear all kinds of things. I think when Sam Pittman left Georgia, that opened the door. This kid, Cedric Van Pran, maybe the number one center in the country from New Orleans. And, Georgia seems to think they've got him locked up, depending on who you talk to, but they think Florida might be their top competition. And I've heard some buzz that Alabama's in there a lot stronger than people think. And, it's really been difficult. I'm being quite honest with you. Very difficult to get a read on Cedric Van Pran and what he might do in terms of Alabama. I mean, I haven't heard enough. I haven't gotten enough feedback on that to make me confident that those who are telling me that watch out for Alabama on Wednesday with Van Pran, I just haven't gotten enough feedback to make me comfortable to believe that just yet. So, again, Georgia is, we're talking about these recruiting battles. Think about Broderick Jones, a 5-star offensive tackle. He's also been committed to Georgia. And, Gary, he's been flirting with Auburn very strongly. Was supposed to make an official visit there this weekend. And suddenly, at the end of his basketball game Friday night, a handful of Georgia assistants show up and convince him not to take that visit, but I would still keep an eye on him. And I know this isn't Alabama related, but this is talking about the way these battles are now. I still would not be surprised. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I guarantee you Auburn has not quit on him, and that could be interesting if he inked with Auburn on Wednesday. But again, I only say all this to say this is where these recruiting battles are right now. It is. I mean, they're down and dirty.
Yep, indeed. And always a surprise or two on National Signing Day, whether it's December or now the second signing period in February. Before we wrap it up, Rodney, you mentioned Jimbo Fisher and what they're paying him, all these coaches. And you and I've discussed this a lot, and I'm glad you brought it up, not just in recruiting, because I think sometimes it flies over people's heads because they're just saying, well, we're Alabama. Well, that's a good start, but you're absolutely right. I mean, these programs are putting so much emphasis into winning, and now we've seen a year where Alabama didn't make the playoff. They didn't make it to Atlanta. LSU won the national championship. Grand scheme of things, big picture-wise, where's Alabama fit in right now in the football hierarchy in the SEC in your mind? Is Alabama still at the top, or are they chasing LSU, Georgia? How do you think the Tide fits in going into 2020 in the SEC football hierarchy, big picture?
Well, first of all, I'm you use that phrase, we're Alabama. Heard that around here for a long time. And you know what? That doesn't really matter. I think that's one thing that can get you in trouble very quickly, is this we're Alabama mentality. And I think Nick Saban has tried to emphasize that ever since the day he stepped on that podium in early January of 2007. It's great to be talking about being a champion, but unless you do all the things that it takes to be a champion, it really doesn't matter. So this we're Alabama thing, there's a lot of people going after Alabama, So as you start to look forward, right now, I think it's becoming more and more competitive. LSU obviously did what they did this year. They're believing. They're recruiting extremely hard. They've got the talent. Certainly, Alabama has to go to Baton Rouge this year. Auburn's Auburn. They're always going to be there. Kirby Smart's been banging on the door for 3 or 4 years now. Jeremy Pruitt's trying to get into the mix too. They were improved this year. They've got a little Wayne streak going right now. You mentioned Jimbo Fisher. A lot of pressure out there. I mean, what'd they go this year? 8-5, something like that. They've got to improve dramatically next year, and they've got probably an easier schedule. So this is not something now that Alabama's the dominant team, if you want to say dominant, because you've got a lot of people, a lot of these schools that think they can beat Alabama, and Alabama didn't make the playoffs this year. I think Alabama's going to have to reload, and when I say reload, you lost some players offensively, but I think they've got the players there. But I mean, I think Alabama has got to. Nick Saban said the Bama factor. I think you got to go back and you got to try to try to regain that momentum in terms of being that dominant team.
Well stayed and well said and well stated. And Alabama, we're Alabama. That was also the case under Mike Shula and Mike DeBose. And you're right. You better have players, and you better be on top of your game. Just rolling the football out there doesn't get it anymore. All right, Ronnie. I know that the next couple of days are going to be hectic, but you got it covered at TiderInsider.com.
Yeah, TiderInsider.com. It's only $48 a year. You can get instant access with your credit card if you prefer. There's an address there to send a check, and gives you all of our premium information, but also the forum where there's a lot of discussion, a lot of football and basketball. And again, it's only $48 a year.
Thanks a lot, Rod.
Okay, buddy. Thank you.